What's up, everybody, and welcome to the first ever Fantasy Insiders. Can we call it the Insider Wire? Huh? The Insider Wire? Or just the Fantasy Insiders?
We do need to brand it, but whatever you just said, those weren't words.
Stealing waivers. That's what we'll do.
0 for 2 so far.
From who?
You're the Matthew Stafford of the Fantasy Insiders right now.
Insiders ADHD. All right. So anyways, this is where we talk about the reaction to week 1, and we talk about what to expect for week 2. We take our victory laps. We take our L's. We share why we are concerned, why we are worried, why our pants are off, why guys move the noodle, so to speak. So we are excited. I'm David Kitchen, Soccer Dave, on the DFS sites. You know me from the Swolecast as well. Joined by Josh ADHD. Josh does all the tools on our site. Got a fancy little usage app on the fantasyinsiders.com site. Next, we have Jeff Johnson, co-host of Fantasy Insider Show on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. And then last but certainly not least, Ben Gretch. He is the editor-in-chief of Fantasy Insiders. He is the author of Stealing Signals, and he is the guy who tells you to play or tells you to draft Ronald Jones in the 10th round of best ball drafts. Ben, I'll start with you. What were your reactions to yesterday to Ronald Jones's stat line?
Well, I thought he played pretty well.
Oh, yeah.
Got in.
He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything bad. But seriously, though,
didn't make any mistakes.
I'm gonna admit something. After you came down to Nashville and convinced me that Ronald Jones was not a bad play, I started drafting him in the 10th and 11th rounds in best ball drafts. So I want to thank you for that. And I was shocked that he was not listed yesterday. I honestly was surprised that he wasn't active yesterday.
I think he's still gonna have plenty of time to make his move. I mean, part of the reason to buy him at a discount was we knew he wasn't going to do anything in September, and he didn't. But Peyton Barber didn't do much. Obviously, Tampa Bay had a very strong game, but passing the ball.
Yeah.
So there's room for Ronald Jones to take some of that backfield share by October.
Oh, clearly. I mean, they didn't look good at all as a team. So lots of room for them to bring in an active guy when they beat the Saints, one of the top teams.
Can we get into the actual show?
No, this is the show.
It's going to be 30 minutes of this.
This is the show. This is the show.
Why don't you tell him about how you're ragging on Austin Eckler and then he scored more than your whole team?
All right. All right. Josh, who was your favorite inactive yesterday?
My favorite inactive was the entire Dallas Cowboys offense.
Oh, man. And Titans offense as well. Ooh. I mean, Fitzmagic, D-Jax. I've got lots of Deshaun Jackson in best ball drafts. I don't have hardly any of him in season long just because I thought that he was like one of these up and down guys that I didn't think was going to be consistent. I believe in the big playability he had, but let's talk about this for a second. Are we buying this offense there in Tampa Bay, Ben?
I mean, one of the reasons I was actually interested in Jameis Winston before the suspension earlier on was that they, as a team, had the most total air yards last year of any offense, and by a pretty solid margin. And obviously Winston didn't play the entire year last year. We saw a little bit of Fitzpatrick as well last year. So it was kind of regardless of the quarterback. Now, I'm not saying that I knew this was going to happen. I didn't play Fitzpatrick anywhere. I didn't have any DFS lineups of him. But there is a reason to be optimistic that this passing game opportunity for all these receivers could be there, and particularly the down the field stuff, because that's what Cutter did last year. And it looks like that's what he's going to do again this year. He had no problem just having this very vertical passing attack and just going at the Saints. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's reason for optimism for sure.
Jeff, your take on Mike Evans? Because I don't know if you were really excited about Mike Evans heading into the season.
I wasn't excited about Mike Evans at his price point in drafts because he's been so inconsistent. Now, that being said, I mean, he's a rare athlete that's 6'5", can high point the ball very well, and obviously has multiple seasons with 10-plus touchdowns. So the talent is there with him. It's just opportunity based on how many mouths there are to feed in that Tampa Bay offense and the inconsistency making you draft him there in the second round. So I like Mike Evans. I think that this could be a good season for him. He looked great yesterday. As long as Ryan Fitzpatrick is his quarterback, I feel good. The problem is that once Jameis Winston comes back, I don't feel like his game is tailored towards the vertical game quite as much as Ryan Fitzpatrick is. Jameis Winston's going to be a little bit more patient in the pocket and try to find the open man as opposed to what Fitzpatrick did yesterday, which is just air the ball every time he could. So that would be my one critique of Mike Evans. What do you think?
I mean, I think that if you have Mike Evans, you're feeling really good about him in the third. I mean, you're getting him potentially sometimes in the third round. I mean, he's going in the third round of drafts, and he has wide receiver 1 potential. Ben, you and I talked about like the zero RB or the modified zero RB strategy, and he's like, he was one of those guys that could be like a wide receiver 1 just with his upside that was being drafted later. Josh, as far as the New Orleans side of things, we saw the concentrated offense towards Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. If you have those two guys, you're feeling good as well.
Yeah, it's this is why you drafted Drew Brees when you could get him at QB8 or QB9 during the summer. And this is why you drafted Michael Thomas in the second round, because Michael Thomas, at least in my opinion, he had wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 upside in his range of outcomes if New Orleans has any semblance of need to throw the ball. They didn't have it last year, and he still smashed. So the fact that they had to go out there and throw the ball 45 times and catch up, I mean, it's just like the good old days were back yesterday. It was so much fun to watch. And, right now I'd say Drew Brees looks like a league winner at this point, much like Russell Wilson was a league winner as QB6, QB7 last year.
The touchdown regression definitely for Brees. I mean, I totally agree with that. The only word of caution I'd say from all this optimism we're saying about this game is there was so much fantasy scoring, right? And that's not going to happen. So in every game for these two teams, so you got to also keep in mind that
if they don't adjust the defense, that is like they were leaving Lattimore out to cover Evans, just single coverage. No, I mean you have to think that both teams are going to adjust, and teams against Tampa Bay are going to adjust accordingly as well.
Certainly, yeah. And to Jeff's point, I mean, like for Tampa Bay especially, I mean, they have a lot of mouths to feed. Everyone got some in this game. Godwin had people who have Godwin are pumped because he had a touchdown and played well. He actually played a lot more snaps than Jackson, and Jackson's somebody that if I could get a high part of the reason to buy Jackson was he was so cheap and he was due for some efficiency regression on deep balls. We already saw him catch 2 deep balls for touchdowns that traveled more than 30 air yards. He had zero of those last year. So, I mean, you already got some of that regression. If someone's willing to pay you a little bit of a premium to make a trade right now, I'd sell him right away because the way that everybody was involved in this game and hit isn't going to be able to happen every single week.
All right, let's move to more statistical surprises. This one surprised me kind of, but not really. Jeff knows all about this. Andrew Luck, he threw 53 passes, by far the most passes, and 4 guys had 9+ targets. You also had Hines having some targets there at the end. Ben, I saw you talking with JJ about the game script with Hines because Indianapolis was up in this game, up until, the fourth quarter?
Right.
It was back and forth.
Hines did catch 3 passes on that final drive. And I think
Doyle caught a bunch of passes at the end as well.
Right. So it was back and forth. They were up for a while, and it's crazy they threw so much given that they did lead for most of the game. But, yeah, I kind of want to get Jeff's take. He can do his victory lap. I mean, we saw
kind of. He threw 50 times. Well, this is the same thing we've been discussing. Like, he threw one pass of 53 went past 20 yards. This is the type of offense we thought we were going to see. When it's just like dink and dunk from him, and he's good at it.
Yeah. So if there was ever a time for me to lay out the victory lap, today would be the day with 53 passes. He looked healthy. He looked good. That fastball that you said did not exist anymore, David, was there yesterday, looking good on those short and intermediate routes. That touchdown pass to T.Y. Hilton, that was pretty typical Andrew Luck. He's able to throw the fastball. We saw that. Of course, you're going to knock him for something because, you're invested in your anti-luck.
Well, no. His ADOT was – I'm not anti-luck because I drafted him in a lot of best ball drafts as well. I'm anti elite luck, like anti top 3 quarterback luck.
Okay, so you don't think that yesterday is going to be repeatable over the course of the season? I think it will be.
I think it's fine. But I don't think they're going to be throwing 53 times.
I think so. Frank Reich is his coach now. It's not like they brought him in to run the ball 35 times a game.
Right.
You mentioned this before on the show. This is a running game that's still being established. I think it's going to be a mess for the first few weeks. We'll see what happens once Marlon Mack gets healthy, but I certainly think they're going to put the ball in Andrew Luck's hands, and if they have any chance to be a successful team this year, he's going to have to be the dominant offensive player on that team. So I feel great about Andrew Luck. Nothing I saw yesterday concerns me at all. He got hit a few times. I don't like Andrew Luck when he tried to make the tackle on the pick 6.
Mm-hmm.
I think his competitiveness takes over, and he says, to hell with this shoulder of mine. I'm going to try to make the tackle when I can. So I'd like to see a little bit less of that. But overall, I mean, he gets very high scores for me from game number 1, and I think it's repeatable through the course of the season.
And a good sign that he got Ryan Grant involved. He got Naheem Hines involved. He got a lot of the ancillary pieces. Eric Ebron caught a touchdown. I mean, he's got these new weapons, but he got all those guys involved a little bit. They all did have really low ADOTs, but he spread the ball around. You didn't have to just lean on Hilton. I mean, I was very, very
the amount of snaps and targets for Doyle is in this offense also makes him a great play throughout the season because he's just going to get those short passes, especially in PPR leagues. George Kittle, let's say, you had Marquise Goodwin that left in the first quarter with a hamstring injury, didn't do anything. Kittle did. Kittle, as we've talked about before, is a guy that is a very athletic guy, more athletic than O.J. Howard, top spark score, as Jeff and I, mention routinely on the SiriusXM show. What's your take on George Kittle going forward?
Well, I think we saw the usage yesterday. If Goodwin's out for any amount of time, I think, Kittle, obviously, I think he steps into 10 to 12 target a game role. Before that, I mean, even if Goodwin's healthy, I think Kittle's probably still looking at a healthy maybe 6 to 9 targets a game. It's clear that Shanahan wants to use his athleticism. I don't know if you fellas saw the next-gen stats chart that was put up for his passing tree yesterday, but he wasn't running dink and dunk stuff. He was running way downfield and getting targeted downfield. Now, is that a symptom of the Minnesota defense just locking down wide receivers? I think that's probably some of it. But is it also a sign of the way Shanahan envisions the usage of his athletic tight end? I absolutely think that's true too. So I think we have to take a really hard look at him going forward as, I'd say even in like tight end premium leagues as a trade target.
Yep.
If you try to pry him away.
And they're not going to be playing the Vikings every week either. I mean,
they won't. But they
matchup.
They have a tough schedule, right? I mean, they play Arizona, so they're going to run up against some lockdown corners again this season. So it's I can't tell. I can't remember if they're playing the AFC the NFC North or not. So I mean, they're right up against Green Bay. Chicago looked pretty stout on defense for a while last night. So I think there's an opportunity there for Kittle to kind of reap the rewards of not being a wide receiver.
Okay, as far as Dion Lewis, he outsnapped Derrick Henry 71% to 29%, 21 to 11 touches. Again, you can look at the usage on Fantasy Insiders. If you go to the left sidebar, click on that usage app and see all the cool little stats that Josh has for us, plus more. Ben, as far as this Titans offense, we don't know yet on Mariota, like what are we doing with the Titans offense? Corey Davis also got targeted 13 times yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, the Titans offense, not a great week 1 for Tennessee, first of all. I mean, they lose their veteran tight end for the year. They have an injured quarterback now. Corey Davis, definitely his usage was very promising. Curtis Patrick from PFF tweeted out earlier that he was used a lot more in the slot, which is a very good sign. And in particular, now there's a lot of available targets. So the the floor would seem to be open for him to have that breakout season that we were hoping for. As far as the running backs, as far as Deion Lewis and Henry played a lot more heavily in the first quarter. Lewis played a lot more because they were in negative game scripts. But if their offense continues to struggle like this, if Mariota misses time, Henry
also had a 62-yard touchdown called back on a phantom holding penalty that hurt the Titans. That was the last thing that Delaney Walker did, I think, for the Titans is have a hold penalty.
But yeah, I think these backs are going to be game script dependent very much. I think Henry is going to kind of be the lead and neutral script early down hammer, and when they get ahead, they're going to use him heavily in the second half. When they're behind, I think Deion Lewis will play a ton.
All right, Jeff, Josh Gordon, 78% snaps. He had 2 end zone targets. Landry, 16 targets. What's your take on the Cleveland offense? Overtime does have a little bit to do with this game, just a bit. But what's your take on this Cleveland offense after seeing them in the rain against Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I think that what we saw from Cleveland yesterday was probably going to be one of the low points of the season for them from an offensive standpoint because, A, it's the first game of the season with a new offensive coordinator, Josh Gordon, who was just inserted into this offense recently because he missed most of the preseason. Jarvis Landry got all the targets we expected for him to get. I mean, we knew he was going to be a target monster this season, taking that Antonio Brown type of role in Todd Haley's offense. So all systems go if you're a Jarvis Landry owner. I think that what we saw yesterday is going to be just a glimpse of what we can expect all season long from him. He looked very, very good, caught a deep pass as well, which is good news if you're a Jarvis Landry owner. And Josh Gordon's going to get the red zone target. So even though it was a tie ball game and Tyrod Taylor looked really, really bad for most of the game, I think that there are some things there to take some hope in if you have a lot invested in that Cleveland Browns offense. The running game, did not look good. There's no doubt about it. Carlos Hyde looked great in the preseason. So if they can get anything going on the ground as well, suddenly this offense becomes that dynamic offense that we hope to see in the preseason.
Yeah, let's talk about the Where's Waldo, the guys that just went kind of missing. David Johnson kind of makes this list. Not really, though. It was just a really bad offense. I mean, it was really bad offense, and he still got there at the end. So I think he's kind of missing, but at least he scored a touchdown at the end. He didn't completely tank your teams. One guy that did tank your teams, though, I've got a lot of them, and I could not figure this out. Chris Hogan. Josh, he played the snaps, but it was all Dorsett yesterday and not Hogan. Are we panicking a little bit with Chris Hogan?
I don't think you panic, but I think if you have him in season-long leagues and you're trying to decide whether you're going to play him or another receiver, I think you're going to have some tough decisions on your hand every week because honestly, with the New England receivers outside of Gronk, you're just guessing each week which guy's going to get the looks in the red zone, honestly. So best ball, I think he's great still. I love the best ball.
I mean, we're out of best ball, though. We're out of best ball. We've got I've got plenty of Chris Hogan in my season. I could care less about my best ball Chris Hogan shares because that's it. I don't have to make a decision anymore about that.
Yeah, but you started talking best ball early on, so I thought
those were for the victory laps. For the victory laps, if you got
what's
Chris
happening
Hogan,
now is David is freaking out about Chris Hogan.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He played 90%.
Nothing to freak out about. There's one game. He's going to be fine.
Just trade him for Tajay Sharp right now. Just get it over with.
Yeah. You're telling me to be fine, and then Josh just basically said if there's any other receiver on your roster, you're playing him over him. That means he's down to wide receiver 4 territory. This scares me. I'm not going to lie.
No, to be honest, don't be scared of Chris Hogan. I mean, it's just this is what you get with New England receivers. You're going to have some bad weeks, and you're going to have some blow-up weeks, and that's what you drafted in the 5th round. That's why you drafted him in the 5th round, because of the ceiling. The floor is there. The floor is always there with the New England receiver just because of their usage. And you draft him for the ceiling, you're going to ride it out because I think at the end of the day, he's going to pay it off.
David didn't draft him in the 5th round. David drafted him in the 3rd. That's the reason why he's saying these things.
Yeah, 3rd, sometimes 4th round. He was up there for me.
This is a great little microcosm though of what you should be trying to do right now in seasonal leagues as well, because like we talk a lot about like psychological bias, or like guys like Bales love to talk about it, but we talk about it a lot in the fantasy football community. We put so much emphasis on this is all the information we have. It's this one game. If this happened in week 5 and Chris Hogan's having a decent season, I mean, receivers have games like this. It's a single game. The biggest reason for it was that Brady found other weapons. It wasn't like the whole offense was terrible. He found Gronk for an early touchdown. He found Dorsett at the 2-minute drill. They were moving the ball other places. That doesn't mean Hogan, you like run away from Hogan. If anything, that means that those guys are going to command more attention, whether it's Gronk or Dorsett, and Hogan's going to have his opportunity soon enough. This is a one-game, small sample thing that we're putting too much emphasis on because it's the primacy effect, it's recency bias, all that. It's the only game we have, and
okay,
you should take advantage of that if you're in leagues. I would say go out and try and trade with people like Dave who are freaking out about Chris Hogan.
Yeah. I'm freaking out about Chris Hogan because they're like, I don't know. I was expecting more with only having like 3 receivers on the team, even though they had Gronk. Like I was expecting a little bit more first game. We saw what he did in the Super Bowl. I want to see more out of him in week 2. Now, I'm not freaking out about Trey Burton. He's the other kind of Where's Waldo. He only had 1 catch. Jeff, we've talked about Trey Burton. He got the targets yesterday, just like really couldn't convert on them.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm not worried about Trey Burton either. In fact, my entire critique of the Chicago Bears offense is that everything is so new, and there's so little time in the preseason to put everything together. I think it's going to take a little time for the offense to be clicking on all cylinders. We saw that last night. They looked great in the first quarter. By the time the second half rolled around, of course, you had adjustments being made from Green Bay, and their offense was in comeback mode. So the whole game got away from the Chicago Bears. I'm taking a patient approach to Trey Burton, who, by the way, is the only receiving option in that offense who seemingly could not catch the ball. Like everybody else had 6 targets, 5 receptions. He was the only one who had a hard time corralling the ball. Not all his fault at all. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm being patient with this offense, much like you're being patient with Chris Hogan. This was an ugly stat line for Trey Burton, but the targets were there for him. The snap count was –
snaps and the routes were there too.
The routes were there for him, so I'm really not worried at all about Trey Burton. And, in fact, I look at a game last night, and I'm talking just like Ben is. I want to go to that Trey Burton owner and make a low-ball offer. Maybe they're frustrated, and you get that reactionary deal and cash in on it later with Trey Burton.
Okay. As far as
I add something real quick. Just really quick about Chicago. I'm going to be on the opposite side of the fence on Chicago. I have major concerns after watching that team last night. And I think the offense is creative. I think the scheme is very positive. I think they're trying to do the right things. I think Mitchell Trubisky is severely limited right now. And we saw it last night. They look great in the first quarter. I agree with that. Like they looked fantastic when they ran their script. And when the script ran out, they were smoked on offense. Like they didn't have a hope. They couldn't move the ball. And you can't just chalk it up to Trey Burton not getting his targets because everybody else caught theirs. And what I saw was a quarterback that's going to severely limit this offense for a while. And unless I see significant improvement over, the next 3 weeks in Trubisky's ability to move the offense down the field, I may be looking to get out of some of these Chicago players that I'm exposed to right now.
Doug Baldwin went down yesterday. Of course, he was already at 85% with the knee. I think it's a sprained MCL if I'm not mistaken. Josh, we're going to start with you because I don't think Gretch can even talk about the Seahawks without shedding a tear right now. With Baldwin going down, what does this offense do?
Man, I don't know. That's a good question. I think it's probably Jaron Brown, who they signed from Arizona. That seems like the most logical place for the ball to go. I guess Tyler Lockett's share is going to have to go up. He's the incumbent. They paid him like he's a stud receiver this offseason, so they clearly think he's the guy that should get the ball a lot. And then we have is it Disley that stepped out of nowhere yesterday and went 3 for 105. I think that's probably just the oddball game and not worth chasing. To me, it's just it kind of comes back to Jaron Brown and Tyler Lockett. I think that's where the volume's going to have to go.
Gretch, what's your impression of this Seattle offense?
My impression of the offense is that their offensive line's terrible, and everyone else is kind of worse. So, I mean, maybe not quite worse than the offensive line, but nothing really optimistic to take from them. But there is a lot of target volume there. There was already a ton of available target volume, and now you have the guy that looked like he might be in the running to potentially lead the league in targets because he was going to have such a heavy share of that offense. He's out now for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We don't know. I think Tyler Lockett moved into the slot a lot more after Doug Baldwin left the game, which we'll probably see, and he'll kind of play the Doug Baldwin role. So that's a positive for him. But I also think it's a really big no for Brandon Marshall. I think you gotta buy Brandon Marshall. I mean, I don't love it, but he caught one touchdown. He had a second touchdown called back because he pushed off offensive pass interference. That's kind of the old guy move. He kind of has to do that to create separation, but he's going to get targets. I think at this point he's going to get the ball thrown towards him. And yeah, I agree with Josh. I'm not buying Will Dissly or other tight ends. I think Nick Vannett was in there running almost the same amount of routes. It just went Dissly's way in week 1, but I think Marshall and Lockett are the two that I'm looking at.
Chris Carson and Rashad Penny each had 7 carries. Of course, going into week 1, we thought Chris Carson was going to have this job and just run with it. Josh, let's start with you. Who do you like best going forward? Chris Carson or Rashad Penny, who, by the way, had 7 carries for 8 yards?
I'm going to say neither. I want zero part of that running game. The only running game I want out of Seattle is what Russell Wilson gives me at quarterback. Otherwise, I'm not going to touch it.
Gretch, what do you think?
I think Penny's fine. I was just going to pull up his numbers, but I think he caught 3 or 4 passes. He was used a little bit more in the passing game, if I'm not mistaken. So he's a guy for me, and also just the fact that Carson kind of won the job, and we still saw them use Penny plenty. They drafted him in the first round. I think and he was coming back from a broken hand. I mean, I think he's the guy they want to use. I just think, long term, he's more likely to be the full service back that gets the passing work and maybe leads the offense.
It's an interesting question because of how much you had to invest in Chris Carson if you're going to take him in your drafts. He's working his way up to the 5th and 6th round in some drafts. And I mean, honestly, I'm a Chris Carson owner. I'm a little worried as well, not just because of the Baldwin injury and the state of this offense, but Rashad Penny had a little bit too much run for me yesterday as a Chris Carson owner. All right, the last injury I want to talk about is Leonard Fournette. Fellas, Leonard Fournette going down with a hamstring injury. Josh does not look good. However, he did say that he's managed this last season. He's not too worried about it. As a Fournette owner, would you be worried going forward with his workload and the fact that they're probably going to need to limit him some?
None whatsoever. I mean, we saw yesterday they were already starting to work him in as a 3rd down receiver. So they've actually expanded his role from last season, which is a good thing in my opinion. So even if they limit him to some degree and they split some of his work up with TJ Yeldon or Corey Grant, I don't have a problem with that. And I'm still fine with Leonard Fournette that sees 20 to 24 touches a game. Even where you had to draft him, if he's getting receiving volume on those 20 to 24 touches, I think that's totally healthy. There's nothing wrong with that. I have no fear about him.
Gretch, are you hitting the waiver wire to add TJ Yeldon this week?
Probably not. I'm probably not that excited about him. I mean, Josh is right. They were using him very, very well early on. The only concern is that hamstrings can potentially linger. So yeah, maybe, but I don't know that it's even necessarily Yeldon or Grant. And when you're in that kind of situation where you don't really know who the backup is, for me, it's not really worth the roster spot, especially because we don't know if Fournette's even going to miss time. So that's the main reason. It just doesn't do anything. Yeldon doesn't do much for me right now.
All right, there were several players that yesterday showed out. We weren't expecting these numbers. At the top of the list, Phillip Lindsay in Denver looked very good. Royce Freeman was supposed to be the guy in Denver. What do you do with that Denver running back situation with the emergence of Phillip Lindsay, Ben?
It's interesting. I mean, I think the first thing you do is you cut Devontae Booker. He's not going to be worth rostering, in my opinion. Royce and Lindsay finished with identical 17 and 51 rushing lines, I think, 17 carries for 51 yards or something like that. Or maybe it was a little bit more, 17 for 71 or something. But they had identical rushing lines, in large part, though, because Royce picked up like 30 yards when they were salting the game away in the final drive. Before that, it was very clearly Lindsay who was the back that was getting it done in all phases of the game. He had a long touchdown reception as well on a short pass that he made the play after the catch. So for me, I mean, I think they were just kind of riding the hot hand, especially because Royce isn't really established yet. I think long term you're probably going to see more Royce, but Lindsay certainly did enough that it's going to be those two going forward. I don't think you want Devontae Booker or anything to do with him. I'm not panicking as a Royce owner. I have him in a lot of places, and I'm not that worried about it because I think I still believe in that talent, and I think he'll be fine. But the other disheartening thing probably would be that he didn't get a lot of receiving work. But it's something to watch. They're both going to be effective. I think it'll be Royce long term still, though.
Josh, do you agree with that? Because Philip Lindsay looked really good.
Yeah, he did look really good, and it was a bit of a revelation. You didn't see a lot of chatter about him this summer, but it picked up through training camp, and I think if we had been paying more attention, we wouldn't have been so fascinated with the shiny object of Royce Freeman and had a little more Lindsay on our rosters. I think Ben's absolutely right. You get rid of Booker right now, and you go looking for another option somewhere else. I think there's enough room in this offense for both running backs to really shine. And I like Ben, I'm surprised that Freeman didn't see any receiving work. He got 0 targets yesterday. And
Austin Eckler, by the way, looked great yesterday as well. Of course, we thought he had some standalone value coming into the season. Josh, let's start with you. With Austin Eckler's 5 receptions, 87 yards, and a touchdown, only had 5 carries for 39 yards. What sort of standalone value can we expect for him going forward?
I think if we think that the Chargers are going to be behind and have negative game script, then Eckler's the guy you want to play, because clearly that's when he was in the game, is when they were just they were running hurry up 4-minute offense trying to get down the field, and he's perfect for that. Like, his touchdown catch yesterday was fantastic. He ran an awesome route, was wide.
Looked like a tight end.
Scored. Yeah, I mean, it was a beautiful play. So to me, that's very positive. But he's going to be game script dependent, in my opinion. So, as long as we think they're competitive or going to be behind, I'm all about Eckler. Otherwise, I think it's Gordon all day long.
The Chargers have a good defense, Gretch. As far as being game script dependent, I don't really think that they're going to be in a situation where they're going to have to be coming back every single week. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Eckler probably has some standalone value, probably not somebody I'm going to want to start anytime soon, and hopefully you drafted well enough that you don't have to consider that. The positive note to the Chargers being ahead potentially is we do see a lot of an increase in running back volume in those scenarios as well. So there could be more touches for the offense overall. It might be the case that if they are leading in a lot of these games going forward, if they get Bosa back and their defense does start to become a little bit more dominant than what we saw in week 1, they spell Gordon in some of these plus game scripts where they have plenty of running back opportunity to go around. So I think he could probably play in all scripts, but still think he's very comfortably behind Gordon, who's a pretty well-rounded back, and they use him in the passing game, they use him in the goal line. So Eckler's just they use Eckler the same way, and just a quarter of the amount or a fifth of the amount. So he's going to have these splash weeks like this. It's going to be a hard thing to predict. It's not someone I want in my lineup probably.
Last player I noticed was Phillip Dorsett. Josh, are you buying in on Phillip Dorsett at all?
I think you have to buy into him. I mean, it's a desert for wide receiver in New England. So if they're going to be throwing to anybody, I think Phillip Dorsett's certainly worth a look if you're desperate for a player right now and you need somebody to stick in there, maybe in place of an injury.
Gretch, how deep would your league have to be for you to plug and play Phillip Dorsett next week?
I don't think it has to be that deep. I mean, they're clearly using him like they used Brandon Cooks last year, and he was out there on a lot of routes, a lot of snaps, pretty heavily involved in the game. So, probably Hogan's going to get those catches going forward, and he's going to be down the pecking order behind Hogan and Gronk, and maybe even the running backs. But it's a good offense. There's going to be plenty of passing touchdowns. We know Tom Brady's going to throw a lot of TDs, and I think Dorsett can be that guy who has a couple splashy games. So not somebody that I like. How deep of a league? I mean, probably you have to be able to play at least 4 receivers, and you got to have a little bit of a thin receiving group. But I could see starting him.
That sounds pretty thin to me. You got to have a 7-receiver league, at least 16 teams.
Right.
All right, guys, that wraps it up. Before we go, though, hot take from week 1 that could actually come true. Josh, you're up first.
Oh, man. Good Lord. I don't know if I have one. Probably the one I want to have is the hot take is that people are going to be way too overconfident about Cleveland going into New Orleans this weekend, and I think they're going to get burned by it.
Gretch?
I'll say Ryan Fitzpatrick continues to start after Jameis Winston comes back from a suspension.
Wow. Okay, so that take is hot.
That's some hot take.
This happens every year with Ryan Fitzpatrick, though. Good game, falls off.
Yeah, but if he puts a couple more together, it's going to be pretty hard for them to pull him. That's an impressive divisional win. We haven't seen anything like that from Jameis.
All right, guys, that just about does it. Week 1 for us of the Fantasy Insiders reaction show. Meh. We'll work on it. We'll get marketing on it. Josh, where can we find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Fantasy ADHD.
Gretch, where can we find you? Yards per Gretch, right?
Yards per Gretch.
At Yards per Gretch. I'm Jeff Johnson from the Fantasy Insiders at Jeff Johnson FI. Good luck in week 2, and we'll catch you next week for the Fantasy Insiders reaction show.